Rain slapped my cheeks like cold pennies as I, Maya Carter, sprinted down Walnut Street, my library badge swinging from my lanyard. It was 9:20 p.m., the hour when Philadelphia feels half asleep and half watching. The umbrella in my hand fought the wind, turning inside out, then snapping back with a sound like a warning. Behind me, footsteps kept time with my own, not close enough to be certain, not far enough to ignore. I told myself it was coincidence, city noise, someone else rushing home. Still, my shoulders stayed high, waiting for the next step. Have you ever felt fear before facts? At 29, I stayed late at the Franklin Free Library to finish returns because overtime meant groceries, not pride. My paycheck was a tightrope, and every week Eli's speech therapy cost $180, the kind of number that sits in your stomach. His father had vanished years ago, leaving me to be both parent and plan. The buses near our row house stopped running after 10 at night, so if I missed the last route, I walked. I hated walking, but I hated being short on rent more. Survival is often just choosing the least terrible option. Tonight my backpack was heavy with damp books too. My mother, Linda, used to say, "Storms pass, but grief taught me weather moves in quietly anyway." 2 years after cancer took her, panic attacks started living under my ribs, waiting for a trigger. I learned to smile through them because Eli, my 6-year-old, watches my face like it's a forecast. A neighbor sat with him tonight, and I'd promised I'd be back before he woke up confused. My phone showed 12% battery, enough to check in once, not enough for comfort. I kept running, tasting rain, repeating my rule: stay upright, stay gentle, stay there. What kind of mom panics in the rain? The library had been quiet, a warm aquarium of fluorescent light and paper dust, where even my breathing sounded acceptable. Out here, the street felt like a different planet. Sidewalks gleamed black, puddles catching amber streetlights and broken coins. Storefronts wore metal grates like armor, and the few pedestrians that passed kept their gaze fixed ahead, as if looking at me might invite trouble. I slowed near a crosswalk to let a car spray by, and the footsteps behind me slowed too. That was the first pinprick of certainty, small but sharp. I told myself not to spiral, but my skin had already started listening. I sped up, aiming for the brighter block near the coffee shop that stayed open late, and the footsteps sped up too. I crossed at the next corner without the walk signal, pretending impatience, and 2 shapes crossed behind me with the same careless timing. Rain blurred the edges of everything, yet my mind drew a clean line between chance and choice. Someone was matching me. Someone had decided my path mattered. My chest tightened, that familiar first stitch of panic, and my breath stopped being automatic. I tried swallowing it down the way I swallow bills and bad news for Eli. For tomorrow. Always. I forced my thoughts into inventory, like I did at work. Name what I could control, shelve what I couldn't. Wet hair, slippery sneakers, 1 key in my pocket, 1 bus stop still 3 blocks away. I pictured Eli's small mouth shaping sounds in therapy, his concentration so fierce it makes me ache. I pictured my mother in a hospital chair, telling me to breathe like I was blowing out birthday candles. So I inhaled slow, held it, exhaled slower, and kept moving. The men stayed behind me, patient, closing the distance in steady, silent math. If I ran, they ran. Freezing meant they won. By the time I reached the next block, my umbrella had given up completely, ribs bent like broken fingers. I shoved it into my backpack and felt the weight drag at my shoulder. My phone buzzed with a low battery warning, the screen dimming as if it wanted to hide. I kept my pace casual, the way women learn to perform calm in cities that punish panic. But my ears tracked everything. The splash of boots, the pause when I paused, the quickening when I quickened. A bus sighed past on the far avenue, too late to catch, too loud to help. I was almost home. My left shoe started slipping, soaked laces loosening with every step, and the tiniest inconvenience felt huge. I ducked under a streetlight, pretending it was nothing, and crouched to retie it. The concrete was cold through my jeans. Rainwater ran off my hair and dripped onto my knuckles. In that bent posture, my peripheral vision caught movement, closer now, and then a flash of metallic shine near the curb, like a tool or blade turning to find light. My lungs locked. Breath became a decision. The world narrowed to sound, wet air, and those footsteps stopping behind me. I knew panic was taking me again. That metallic glint under the streetlight turned my stomach to ice. My body reacted before my brain could name what I saw. My chest snapped tight, as if someone cinched a belt around my ribs. Breath stopped being a reflex and became a chore. Rain ran into my eyes, and the footsteps behind me paused, close enough to hear breathing. I forced myself up, fingers numb, and curled my keys between my knuckles like a child pretending at bravery. My phone was already in my hand, screen slick with rain. I searched for light, for a doorway, for anyone. Across the street, a deli sign buzzed, but traffic and wet distance felt enormous. The men stayed behind me, measuring steps. All I could think was Eli asleep in a stranger's living room, his little backpack by the door, his inhaler tucked in the front pocket because I pack it every night. I needed to get home, not to prove anything, just to exist for him. Have you ever hated your own fear for stealing time you cannot spare from you? I took 2 quick steps, then 3, trying to look casual while my lungs worked like broken bellows. My vision pinched at the edges, streetlights smearing into watery halos. When I crossed again, they crossed again. It wasn't imagination. It was choreography. I aimed for the deli anyway, whispering to myself to keep moving, while my body screamed. My thumb found the 911 button, but it took 3 tries because my hands were shaking too hard to obey. The screen kept sliding under raindrops, and my breath was so loud I couldn't hear the city anymore. Seconds stretched strangely, like rubber pulled thin. Does time always get weird when your body thinks you are about to die tonight? Linda taught me a quiet ritual when I was little. Name what is real, touch something solid, and let the breath count you back into yourself. I pressed my palm to the brick wall beside the deli window, feeling cold grit. I tried counting my inhales the way I count Eli's syllables in practice, steady and slow. Panic argued back. I pushed off the wall and took another step, but dizziness rolled through me like a wave. My fingertips tingled, then went clumsy, as if they belonged to someone else. The footsteps closed, heavier now, splashing through puddles with purpose. The deli light flickered above me, and my knees started to soften. I hated that softness more than rain ever. My phone slipped from my wet grip and slapped the sidewalk, skittering into a shallow puddle. The sound felt final, like a door locking. I reached for it, but my balance broke, and I went down onto my knees. Shame rose hot and useless. I didn't want to be a headline. I wanted to be a mother who comes home. My breath rasped in and out, too shallow to satisfy, and the world tunneled until only the puddle beside my phone existed. A shadow moved near my shoulder. I braced for hands, for pain, for whatever came next. Instead, sharp brakes hissed nearby. A car door slammed. Another. Voices rose in a blur I couldn't decode, then went dead. Hands grabbed me, but not like the ones I feared. They were steady, lifting under my arms as if I weighed nothing. The air shifted, filled with expensive cologne and dry wool. My cheek brushed a sleeve that felt too expensive for my life. Behind me, the footsteps stopped. I sensed the 2 men hesitate, then fade back into the rain. I tried to look up, but my vision wobbled. I caught dark hair, a jaw set like stone, and eyes the color of winter pavement. The face didn't look gentle. It looked certain. I sensed command in the way he moved, like the street answered to him. Was I being rescued or collected? In that moment, I couldn't tell either. He carried me to a car idling at the curb, headlights turning rain into needles. The door opened, and warm air hit my face. I slid onto leather that felt too expensive for my life. My hands fumbled for my phone, then my keys. I kept thinking of Eli, waiting for me to come home before the night swallowed me. The door shut with a heavy thud, and the street went muffled. The engine rolled into motion. A hand steadied my shoulder, careful and efficient. My heart still sprinted inside my ribs, but the air felt drier. I pictured Linda smoothing my hair after childhood nightmares, and I tried to borrow that calm until my sight dimmed and thoughts scattered. I tried to form a question, but my tongue stuck. Outside, rain became lines, then blur. Inside, warmth pressed against my soaked skin. The stranger's presence stayed close, controlled. I caught flash of storm-cold eyes, and my stomach flipped with doubt. Saved or taken, I couldn't decide. The car moved, the city fell away, and my consciousness went out. Sunlight hit my eyelids. For a second I thought I'd fallen asleep on my own couch, the one that sags in the middle. But the fabric under my fingers was too smooth, too cool. I opened my eyes and saw a ceiling that belonged to a hotel brochure. Not my row house. The sheets were white and heavy, the kind that don't wrinkle when you move. The air smelled like clean wood and leather, not laundry detergent and microwave noodles. My first thought was Eli. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't philosophical. It was a bolt of panic. Where is my son? Had he woken up calling for me? Did he have his inhaler? Was he scared? I pushed myself upright, and the mattress lifted me back like it wanted to keep me. My head felt foggy, but my body still remembered rain and streetlights and that flash of metal. A quiet door opened without a squeak. A man in scrubs stepped in carrying a small case and a tablet, moving like someone used to private rooms. He checked the monitor clipped to my finger, then my pulse, then the bruised tenderness in my throat that always followed a panic attack. When he spoke, he used my last name like it was ordinary, as if I'd introduced myself and signed paperwork. I hadn't. My stomach dropped anyway. I demanded to know how he knew who I was, but my voice came out thin, more hoarse than fierce. He didn't argue. He simply adjusted something on the tablet and told me, in a calm, professional way, that my vitals were stabilizing and I needed fluids. The message landed beneath the details. Someone had access to my identity. Fast. Then the other door opened, and the room felt smaller. The man from the car stepped in, no longer a blur of rain but sharp and solid in daylight. He wore a dark suit like it was armor, and moved with the stillness of a person who never has to rush. His gaze found mine and held it, steady as a lock. I knew, before he said anything, that he was the reason the world had gone quiet on that sidewalk. He introduced himself as Adrian DeMarco, as if names were weapons and he'd just set one on the table. I didn't recognize the name from my own life, but I recognized the reaction it triggered in my body. Alert, wary, alive. He didn't sit close, yet it felt like he took up the air between us. On his wrist was a watch that cost more than my car ever did, and on his face was a calm that didn't come from comfort. It came from control. Without apology, he let me know he'd learned what he needed. Maya Carter, 29. Library assistant. Single mom. Lives in West Philly. Mother, Linda, died of cancer. The words weren't delivered like a threat, but they landed like one. Every detail was a finger pressing on my privacy, testing where I might crack. I felt exposed in a room full of softness. Gratitude tried to rise anyway, because I was alive, because I wasn't on a wet sidewalk, because someone had intervened. But anger pushed up beside it, hotter and sharper. I didn't want to be saved by being studied. I didn't want my life laid out like a file. I needed my son, not a stranger's efficiency. Adrian didn't explain himself first. He showed me proof. He handed me a phone with a video already cued. Grainy but clear enough to make my skin crawl. Two men waited across from the library doors. They watched the sidewalk the way hunters watch a trail. When I left, they followed at a measured distance, matching my pace, matching my turns. In the clip, I looked smaller than I felt. A dark figure under streetlights. Easy to lose, easy to take. The camera angle shifted, catching the moment I bent to tie my shoe, catching the metallic glint I'd seen, catching my collapse. I stared until my eyes burned, so I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't overreacted. I hadn't been weak. Someone had planned it. Someone had hired patience. My knees went cold, not from rain this time, but from understanding. I asked why me, and even inside my head it sounded like a prayer and an accusation at once. Adrian's expression didn't soften. He made it clear, in the way he chose his pauses, that he didn't know the full answer yet. But he knew this. The men weren't random, and they would try again if they thought last night failed by chance. That was the moment the room's luxury stopped feeling like comfort and started feeling like containment. Outside those windows, the city moved on, bright and ordinary, as if nothing had happened. Inside, my life had shifted into someone else's story. I wasn't unlucky. I was selected. And the man standing in front of me was now part of the plan, whether I trusted him or not. All I wanted was my son. I told Adrian DeMarco, as calmly as my shaking throat allowed, that I was leaving this penthouse. Whatever the risk. Eli would be waking soon, and he needed my arms, not a stranger's security plan. My body still remembered the sidewalk, but motherhood is its own kind of stubborn. Adrian watched me like he was weighing outcomes. I felt relief I was alive, and fury that my life had become negotiable in rooms smelling like money and polish. He didn't argue the way normal men argue. He moved. A driver appeared at a quiet door. My damp clothes were replaced by a borrowed sweater that fit too well, as if guessed. Someone returned my phone, dried, fully charged. I understood then that his power was not magic. It was people, systems, favors owed, fear organized into schedules. While I kept thinking of Eli's bedtime story, Adrian's world made calls that shifted traffic and attention before I asked what any of it meant. The ride back felt like crossing a border I hadn't known existed. The car smelled of leather and quiet, and the windows muted the city's noise like thick glass. Outside, Philadelphia looked ordinary, but I saw it differently now. Darker corners, longer shadows, strangers who never looked up. The blocks near my place seemed smaller, poorer, and more exposed than they had yesterday. Safety had rewired my eyes. I wondered who else had been watching my streets and when my routine became a map. My building's front door used to stick, the lock half broken for months. Now it clicked cleanly, and a new reader blinked beside it, as if I'd stepped into a hotel. A camera sat above the entry, its tiny eye pointed at the sidewalk where I used to fumble for keys. Inside, the hallway lights were brighter. A fresh fob waited in my pocket, handed to me without questions. I felt safer, and somehow less at home, like someone had redecorated my life overnight quietly. Upstairs, my apartment door looked the same, but the frame felt heavier, reinforced beneath fresh paint. The deadbolt turned with a new resistance. When I stepped inside, a soft beep answered me, and I saw a small motion sensor in the corner, angled toward the window. Another strip hugged the glass, an alarm I hadn't requested. The room was still my room, but it was wrapped in an invisible net. I could breathe, yet I couldn't relax because layer of safety felt like watching. Protection, I realized, is a word that can hug or choke. In my old life, freedom meant walking where I pleased, even if it was risky. In Adrian's orbit, freedom came with cameras and people who knew my schedule better than I did. I was grateful and angry at the same time, which is a confusing place to live. Have you ever accepted help and wondered if it was also ownership? My pride wanted to run. My fear wanted to stay for Eli's sake. Eli ran into me when I arrived, warm and sleepy, his small arms wrapping my waist like a belt. The neighbor looked relieved, and I felt a rush of shame for the chaos I'd dragged near their door. Eli's cheeks were flushed from dreaming, and he studied my face in that careful way he speaks, waiting for reassurance. I gave it with my body, not my words, holding him steady until my heartbeat slowed. Outside, a car sat down the block, engine idling, watching. An hour later, my phone buzzed with Jenna Brooks's name, and my chest tightened for a different reason. Jenna sounded breathless and grateful, explaining that her aunt's hospital bill had been covered overnight by an anonymous benefactor, and she kept thanking me for helping. I listened, stunned, because I hadn't done anything except survive. Guilt settled heavy, because Jenna was relieved and I was lying by omission. My mind returned to Adrian's calm efficiency. He had paid, hadn't he, without asking it cost me. That night, I walked my living room and tried to price safety like a budget line. My rent was fixed. Therapy was fixed. Groceries were fixed. But this new protection had no number attached, only a sense of debt forming in the dark. I kept remembering the way Adrian learned my life in minutes, and how quickly he could change it. Have you ever wondered if a favor is a leash? Tomorrow I would go back to the library. Routine was my last rebellion. Before sleep, I checked every lock twice, then checked Eli's breathing, remembering his toddler years. The new sensors blinked faintly, patient and silent. Somewhere beyond my curtains, I imagined eyes on the street, collecting my movements like data. I didn't know if the watchers were there to harm me or to guard me, and that uncertainty felt like another trap. Still, morning would come, and I would put on my badge and perform normal. Deep down, I knew Adrian would not stay away either. By 6:10 in the evening, the Franklin Free Library had its usual hush, but my nerves didn't believe in usual anymore. I slid returns onto carts, stamped due dates, and smiled at patrons, while my eyes kept checking reflections in the glass cases. Every doorway felt like a question. Every shadow between stacks felt like a hiding place. I told myself I was safe, that the new camera in my hallway and the reinforced lock at home meant I could act normal. Still, my body kept listening for footsteps. A grad student asked for a book on early American quilting, and I walked her to the right aisle with hands that looked steady. A little boy traced picture books, humming, and I thought of Eli's backpack hanging by our door. I could almost feel his forehead against my collarbone from that morning, when he'd asked why my hair still smelled like rain. I'd answered with the softest version of truth I could manage. Being a single mom means translating fear into something a child can hold. The front doors opened, and the air shifted. People didn't gasp or stare. They simply made space, the way crowds do when they sense authority. I glanced up and saw Adrian DeMarco moving through the lobby as if the building belonged to him and the rules were optional. His suit was dark, his steps quiet, his expression unreadable. In a place built for whispers, he looked like a man who could end conversations without raising his voice. My first reaction was anger. He had no right to show up here, to drag his world into mine, to make my coworkers feel like extras. My second reaction was relief, and that made me hate myself a little, because relief meant part of me had started to associate him with survival. Have you ever met someone who made you feel safer and smaller at the same time? He didn't corner me or touch me. He waited near the reference desk until my shift ended, and the last patrons drifted out. Then, with a glance that felt like a door opening, he guided me toward a back exit. I followed because pride is useless when you're being hunted, and curiosity has always been my oldest weakness. The car outside wasn't flashy, just clean and silent, and the driver didn't look at me. We crossed the city in a calm stream of lights. Adrian watched the streets the way I watch my son on a playground, alert to everything, expecting trouble, ready to intervene. Even in that car, I kept doing mom math, daycare pickup at 8, therapy on Tuesday, $180 due, and my phone's battery always charged. The restaurant had no sign. From the sidewalk, it looked closed, a blank door in a row of brick. But when we arrived, someone opened it immediately, and warm air wrapped around me like expensive fabric. Inside, the lighting was low and honey-colored. A single table waited in an alcove with a view of the river, positioned so no one could approach unnoticed. My thrift store coat was damp at the cuffs, and I felt ridiculous while staff moved with choreographed grace. I scanned the menu and almost laughed at myself, because every entree cost more than a week of Eli's therapy. How does a person eat without flinching when the numbers look like rent? Dinner felt like a lesson in contrast. I tasted food that didn't come from boxes. I watched Adrian's hands, steady and ringless, and wondered how a man so controlled could exist in the same city where I counted quarters for laundry. He spoke about schools, funding, after-school programs, and the politics of which neighborhoods get protected and which get forgotten. He didn't sound like a preacher. He sounded like someone describing responsibilities, like the city was a living thing he managed whether he wanted to or not. At one point, he mentioned my mother with blunt certainty, and the name Linda landed in my chest like a weight. My mind flashed back to hospital corridors and insurance calls, to the way bills had arrived and somehow stopped crushing us. I'd called it luck, or kindness from a program I never fully understood. Sitting across from Adrian, I felt that old miracle shift into something deliberate. The way he spoke about hospitals, donations, and paperwork was too familiar. His knowledge didn't feel new. It felt practiced. When he walked me back to the car, the night air seemed sharper, and the city felt like it was holding its breath. I stared at the dark river and realized my life had been rearranged in pieces I hadn't noticed until now. Adrian wasn't just a stranger who found me in the rain. He was a man who had been close enough to touch the edges of my story for years. And if that was true, then someone else had noticed him noticing me. I went home with my stomach tight, waiting for whatever came next. By 9:05 in the morning, the Franklin Free Library looked ordinary again. The fluorescent hum was steady, the stamp pad smelled like ink, and my cart squeaked as I pushed returns toward the stacks, but my body stayed on last night's sidewalk. I kept checking the glass doors, the reflections in the display cases, the gaps between shelves where someone could stand without being seen. I smiled at a senior asking for large print mysteries, and I nodded at a teen tapping a laptop. Yet my pulse never fully settled. I told myself Eli was safe at school. His inhaler zipped in his backpack, but the thought felt like paper over a crack that could split any minute. A courier in a dark raincoat approached the front desk carrying a box as long as my forearm. He set it down, waited for my signature, and glanced at me as if he already knew my name. When I lifted the lid, the room seemed to inhale. Black roses, dense and velvety, were packed beside white lilies so bright they looked unreal under library lights. The arrangement was enormous, the kind you see at galas, not at a public branch where patrons count coins for printing. Coworkers paused mid-conversation. A mother in the children's corner stared. I forced my face into a polite expression, because panic in public feels like failure. But my stomach turned cold with the certainty that this was meant to be seen. Even the security guard looked helpless, and every window felt like an invitation. Inside the flowers, a card rested in a slim envelope, the paper thick, the handwriting smooth and practiced. I read it once, then again, trying to convince myself it was only marketing, only a mistake. The message spoke of beauty and endings, of stories closing whether the reader was ready. It didn't mention a knife or a gun. It didn't have to. My fingers went numb anyway. Sound in the lobby faded until I could hear only my own breath, harsh and too fast. I thought of the men behind me in the rain, and of the camera footage Adrian showed. Someone wasn't satisfied with watching. Someone wanted me to know they were close. I folded the card back into the envelope like it was contaminated, and I looked up at the big front windows as if they saw me. My mind snapped to Eli with a clarity that cut through shock. If they could reach me at work, they could reach him at recess. I ran through the school list in my head, who was allowed to pick him up, which phone number they used if I missed a call, where the nurse kept spare asthma meds. I pictured his teacher's smile and hated how fragile it suddenly looked. I carried the flowers to a back room with my arms stiff, then washed my hands like I could scrub fear off skin. I called Adrian with shaking fingers, not to beg, but to report, to demand the situation be named. The line connected fast, and the speed of it made my throat tighten. Help arrived before my panic could bloom. I stayed steady because Eli deserved it from me. Leo Vargas showed up within minutes, dressed like a businessman but moving like a guard dog on a leash. 2 men shadowed him, quiet, scanning. Leo photographed the card, the petals, the delivery label, and the front desk camera angle, as if the library had become a crime scene without police tape. He bagged the envelope in plastic and asked for security footage from every entrance, then walked the lobby counting sightlines. I watched him note the wide windows, the side door near children's, the stairwell that led to silent floors. The way he worked was calming in one sense, because it meant someone competent believed me. In another sense, it confirmed my life was no longer my own. Direct contact meant the watching had graduated into action, and my routine was now evidence. He didn't raise his voice, yet the staff listened. Patrons drifted away. I realized the library, my sanctuary, could not hide me from power anymore. After Leo left with the flowers, the lobby looked too bright, too exposed. I kept working because bills do not pause for fear, but my thoughts stayed on the card's calm cruelty. Whoever sent it wanted me to picture Eli, to imagine my son growing up with my absence as his weather. I finished my shift under discreet eyes, and when I stepped outside, a car waited at the curb the way it had last night, quiet and patient. Part of me was grateful. Part of me felt trapped behind glass. I knew I needed someone to talk to who still felt like mine, someone who knew my history and my heart. I texted Jenna without thinking, then froze as dread returned. If danger had learned my name, it could learn his too. And that was the moment I understood it. Jenna showed up just after 8:40 at night, soaked from a drizzle and shivering in the same gray hoodie I'd seen on her 3 days ago. Adrian's people had brought me to a quiet townhouse with a gate and cameras that blinked like patient eyes, and Jenna looked wrong against that kind of order. Her hair was unwashed. Her hands trembled around a paper cup, and she kept glancing past me as if expecting someone to grab her back. Seeing her like that yanked me backward. Jenna had been the person who knew my life without needing explanations. The one who held Eli on her hip while I ran laundry, who left soup on my stove when Mom was fading, who sat beside me in hospital hallways and taught me to breathe through waiting. When my panic attacks started, she learned the signs before I did. I had trusted her the way you trust a railing on dark stairs. She asked to speak alone, and the request itself felt like a confession. I led her into a small sitting room, and the door clicked shut with a soft, expensive finality. Jenna's eyes filled, then emptied, like she'd already cried everything out on the way here. What she gave me next came in broken pieces. Her family owed money, more than they could ever pay, to men who didn't forgive late payments. The name Rossi landed like gravel in my mouth. She told me it started years ago, after her dad's gambling spiraled and her mom's health bills piled up. Banks said no, and the Rossi syndicate said yes, smiling while they tightened the rope. At first they wanted harmless things, she insisted. Just proof I was doing okay. My work schedule, the nights I stayed late, which bus line I took, the neighbor who watched Eli. She said she believed she was protecting her family, not betraying mine. As she spoke, memories rearranged themselves into evidence. Jenna's casual questions about my overtime, her reminders about the last bus after 10 at night, the way she'd asked, too often, whether Eli's inhaler was still in his backpack, whether his teacher knew my number, whether my neighbor had a spare key. I had called it concern. Now it sounded like inventory. The 2 men outside the library hadn't guessed my route. They'd been handed it. I remembered the night Linda died, Jenna rubbing my back while I signed forms, promising I would never be alone. I believed her. In that moment, betrayal felt like my lungs learning air, sharp and thin, and I struggled to stay standing. Then I noticed the angle of her purse on the couch, the careful way she kept it close, the faint glow through the zipper seam. My stomach turned. I asked her to show me what was inside, and she hesitated long enough to answer the question for me. When she finally pulled out her phone, the screen reflected a running timer and a pulsing icon that meant every word in this room was being captured. She hadn't come only to confess. She'd come to collect. Something in me went cold and loud at the same time. I felt 12 again, watching my father's car disappear, learning that love can leave without warning. I felt 27, signing my mother's death paperwork alone because relatives stopped returning calls. Now I was 29, a mother myself, realizing my closest friend had been feeding my life to people who saw me as leverage. Anger rose, but grief rose higher, because grief always does. My mind went straight to Eli, the way it always does when fear gets teeth. Jenna knew his school's name. She knew which mornings he had speech therapy. She knew he hated loud sirens and that he wheezed after running too hard. If she'd reported those details, then the black roses weren't only a threat to me. They were a message that someone could reach my child through my routine. The thought made my hands shake with a different kind of panic, protective and furious. Footsteps sounded in the hall before I heard the knock, and a man I recognized from earlier, Leo Vargas, entered with the calm speed of someone trained for escalation. His gaze flicked to the phone in Jenna's hand, then to me, then back to her. I didn't need his words to understand the rule I'd just broken by bringing her inside. One of the guards lifted a small device from Jenna's pocket, and the air changed. Jenna's face collapsed. So did mine. They escorted Jenna away with professional restraint. Not kindness, not cruelty, just procedure. I stood there staring at the empty couch cushion where she'd been, trying to feel the floor under my feet. In the doorway, Adrian appeared, silent as he always was, his expression too controlled for a man hearing new betrayal. He looked at me like he was measuring damage, not shock. That was when I realized the worst truth might still be waiting for me. The moment Jenna's phone was taken, the townhouse stopped feeling like a shelter and started feeling like a command center. Men in dark suits moved in quiet patterns, checking doors, sweeping the hallway, speaking into earpieces I couldn't hear. A small camera on the ceiling blinked, recording my shaking hands as if they were evidence. Leo Vargas bagged the device the way a nurse bags contaminated gauze. No one yelled, but everything tightened. I stood in the middle of it, bareheaded, damp-eyed, and suddenly aware that I was inside someone else's protocols, not my own instincts. My pulse kept asking, who is safe here now? Adrian DeMarco appeared in the doorway without hurry, his coat dry, his face unreadable. He looked at the empty couch, then at me, and his eyes didn't widen the way mine had. It was the calm of confirmation, not discovery. He listened while Leo summarized what happened, and his attention stayed sharp, as if he had already mapped this outcome. I felt heat rise up my neck. Have you ever watched someone absorb your heartbreak like a report? I demanded an explanation, but what I heard back was strategy disguised as reassurance. In that instant, I realized fear can wear suit and call itself protection. Piece by piece, Adrian let me understand the truth I had been circling. Jenna had been compromised long before tonight, and his team had known for months. They had traced Rossi's information chain, watched what Jenna passed along, and fed back what they wanted Rossi to believe. My normal friendship had been preserved on purpose, because my natural behavior kept Jenna from suspecting she was exposed. Adrian framed it as keeping me alive, as controlling the flow so Rossi stayed predictable. I could follow the logic, and it still felt like being held down. Was I ever a person in this plan, or only bait? My throat tightened until swallowing hurt. I pictured every time Jenna asked about my shift, every time she offered to pick Eli up, every time she listened to my panic like it was sacred. Now I saw those moments as files. Anger came fast, but grief came deeper. The old grief that started when my father left and never fully stopped. I wanted to scream that I deserved consent, not management. Instead, my hands shook, my face burned, and nausea rolled through me. Adrian's reasons might be practical, but my trust was not a tool. It was the last soft thing I owned. Until now. Then Eli's name flared in my mind like a siren. Jenna knew his teacher, his pickup code, the mornings he coughed after recess, the way he clutched my sleeve when loud trucks passed. If Adrian had kept me ignorant to protect an investigation, then he had also kept my child in the orbit of a compromised friend. My fear sharpened into something clean. I didn't care that guards existed or cameras blinked. I cared that my son could have been used to break me. Adrian insisted, in his way, that Eli had been covered, watched, untouchable. That claim did not erase the risk he allowed. I understood the math he was doing. Control the channel, shape what Rossi thinks, stay ahead. In his world, truth gets rationed like ammunition, handed out only when it buys survival. But I wasn't a soldier in his organization. I was a mother who shelves books and counts dollars. A woman who needs honesty the way she needs air. Safety without consent felt like a soft prison, padded and quiet. still locked. I told myself I should be grateful, and the thought tasted bitter. Have you ever realized someone can be right and still hurt you? I was realizing it now, and it broke me. I told Adrian I needed space, not another plan. My voice sounded steadier than my hands. Leo warned me with a look that said streets are not forgiving, but I was past listening. I stuffed Eli's clothes into my tote, checked my phone, and walked out of the gated calm into open air. The night smelled like wet leaves and exhaust. A car idled nearby, shadowing me, and that made me furious. I wanted my own footsteps again. I climbed into a rideshare anyway, because independence and safety were tangled like wires. As the townhouse vanished, I felt brave and stupid with Eli's name burning. My apartment greeted me with locks and sensors, as if it had been waiting to accuse me. I set Eli's dinosaur on the counter and listened. Pipes ticking, a neighbor's TV, footsteps on the stairs that might be nothing. Every sound became a question. Outside, rain tapped the window alarm. I replayed Jenna's face, then Adrian's calm, and couldn't decide which betrayal hurt worse. I felt hunted, and I felt managed. I slept in pieces, waking to check the door. By morning, I returned to the library on autopilot, desperate for quiet. I didn't know the stacks were holding a truth that would change everything. Sleep came in scraps that night, the kind that leave you more tired than awake. Every click from my new deadbolt sounded like a test. I checked Eli twice, then a third time, watching his chest rise under his superhero blanket, telling myself that if I could keep him breathing, I could keep everything else from falling apart. By morning, I was hollow, but routine is a rope, so I went to work. At 1:30 in the afternoon, I slipped away from the front desk and hid where I always used to hide when life got loud. The back reference aisles, near the locked cabinet of local history and rare prints. My hands still shook, but the stacks gave me corners to breathe in. I ran my fingers along spines, pretending I was just shelving, not searching for a place where my nervous system could unclench. A returned medical policy journal sat on the sorting cart with a faded yellow slip inside, the kind patrons forget to remove. I carried it to a table and opened it, expecting a receipt. Instead, a square of newsprint slid out, folded tight, edges frayed as if it had been opened and refolded 100 times. The paper smelled like old ink and basement air. A staple mark bit one corner. Someone had saved it, and someone had hidden it. The headline, blurred by age, announced a donation for experimental cancer treatments, funding for patients whose insurance could not cover what hope required. The article described a foundation, a ceremonial check, administrators smiling beside hospital banners. Halfway down, a line mentioned a librarian's mother receiving access to a program that would have otherwise been impossible. My throat went dry. I read that sentence again, slower, as if different speed could change meaning. The photo at the bottom punched the air out of me. I recognized the hospital lobby even through grainy print, the same bland walls and two bright lights where I used to sit with Linda, holding her hand while she tried to joke about bad coffee. In the foreground, two men shook hands over a giant check. Behind them, half in shadow near a doorway, stood a younger Adrian DeMarco. The angle caught his profile, the same controlled posture, the same gaze that made rooms feel smaller. He looked like someone watching a battlefield, not a fundraiser. My mind snapped back to the impossible math of that year. Bills that should have crushed us softened, not erased, but manageable enough that I could still buy Eli diapers without crying in the checkout line. I had blamed payment plans, paperwork miracles, kindness from strangers I would never meet. I had never considered a person, a decision, a promise. The clipping made the past rearrange itself. It also made my anger from last night shift into something heavier. Adrian had not simply lied to control me. He had been there. I took out the emergency number he gave me, the one I swore I would not use unless blood was involved. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped the phone. When I called, my voice sounded different, less accusatory, more cracked open. I told him what I found, and I heard my own breathing in the silence that followed. Then the silence ended with movement on his side, like he was already standing. He arrived faster than city traffic should allow, appearing between shelves as if the library itself had summoned him. He looked tired in a way his suit could not hide, the fatigue of a man who holds too many truths alone. He sat across from me without touching the table, letting the clipping lie between us like evidence and confession. I watched his eyes move over the print, and I felt something in him loosen. Not softness, but resignation. The meaning of what he shared settled into me in careful layers. Linda had met him through those hospital programs. She had known his name when I did not. Near the end, when treatment stopped working, She had asked him to watch over me after she was gone, because she worried I would pretend I was fine until I broke. She had asked him to keep me safe, even if I hated the way safety looked. And he had promised, the kind of promise men like him treat like law. I thought about Eli, about what I would do if someone told me my time was running out and my child would be left alone in a city that eats softness. I understood, suddenly, why a mother might choose an imperfect guardian over no guardian at all. The truth did not erase Adrian's control, or Jenna's betrayal, or the fear still stalking my steps. But it flipped the motive into something I could not dismiss as strategy. Protection had started with my mother's love, carried in silence for years, and now I had to decide whether to keep fighting alone, or step back into his world with my eyes open. I went back to Adrian with the clipping folded in my pocket, like a confession I could not unfeel. Linda's name sat between us even when neither of us said it, and I understood his promise had been heavier than any favor. I told him, in the steadiest voice I owned, that I would accept protection, but I would not stay powerless inside it. If fear was going to live with me, it needed rules, and I needed skills that could bring me back to Eli. The first session happened in a spare room that smelled of disinfectant and leather, where even the silence felt supervised. A trainer from Adrian's team asked me to repeat simple drills while he watched from a corner, hands still, eyes awake. Within minutes, my throat tightened and heat rushed up my neck, the old panic trying to claim the room as mine. I felt embarrassed by how fast my body betrayed me, and I almost walked out, imagining Eli watching me quit. Instead, I planted my feet, named 5 ordinary things I could see, and kept going until my breath returned. Day by day, I learned to catch the storm earlier, the moment my chest started to tighten, not when I was already drowning. I practiced slow counts, grounding my hands on a tabletop, and letting my mind list colors and shapes until the world widened again. The work felt small, almost childish, but it built a bridge between terror and action, which was all I needed. In the car, in hallways, in elevators, I started noticing exits first, then light, then the flow of people. I kept my phone charged, my hands free, and my attention outward, the way mothers do at crowded playgrounds. Nothing about it made me brave. It just made me prepared, and preparation felt like a kind of peace. At home, I folded Eli's hoodie with the dinosaur patch, smoothing the sleeves like I could smooth our future. I checked tomorrow's pickup plan twice, texted the neighbor who had the backup key, and taped a fresh note for the school office. On a video call, Eli showed me a drawing of a library with a giant heart on the roof, and my chest ached with purpose. I was not training to win fights. I was training to come home. Midweek, as sirens wailed outside the townhouse and a heavy bang echoed from the street, my body flinched hard. For a heartbeat, I felt the old slide toward collapse. But I caught myself, named the room, and kept my breathing slow. No one praised me, yet I knew I had crossed a line, from helpless to functional. Adrian watched that moment the way he watched everything, with a focus that felt like both respect and possession. I began to understand his rules. My movements were logged, cars rotated, doors locked behind me, and privacy existed only in degrees. It scared me, but it also meant no one could touch Eli through my careless habits again. I accepted the structure the way I accept my rent bill, not because I love it, but because it keeps my child sheltered. By Friday evening, the townhouse felt less like a cage and more like a workshop where I was rebuilding myself. Then every phone in the room vibrated at once, and the men around Adrian shifted into their sharper selves. Leo returned with a folder and a look that made my skin tighten, the look of plans turning into deadlines. I understood, without hearing details, that Rossi was done with poetry and ready to force terms. Adrian's gaze found mine, and for the first time I saw worry beneath his control. Not for himself, but for what they might do to me. My stomach dropped, yet my mind stayed clearer than it would have a week ago, as if training had already changed the shape of fear. I thought of Eli's drawing, the library with the heart, and I promised myself I would not let this story end for him. Whatever was coming, I would meet it awake, breathing, and looking for the nearest light. They started moving me through hallways with more urgency, checking routes, switching cars, tightening the invisible circle around my life. No one said the destination, but I felt the city outside the window turn from familiar streets into possible ambush points. I asked myself what I truly wanted. Not comfort, not revenge, just the chance to tuck Eli in again tomorrow night. The thought steadied me, and I realized that was the whole point of this week, to find steadiness on command. As we paused at a doorway, I caught my reflection in a dark window, eyes wider, posture straighter, fear still there but no longer steering. Adrian's world had pulled me into its shadow, but I was learning to bring my own light with me. When the car rolled toward the industrial edge of the city, I knew the next lesson would not be practiced. Not tonight. I came to on cold concrete, wrists cinched, ankles heavy, the air tasting like rust and wet cardboard. A fluorescent strip buzzed above me, blinking like a tired insect. My first thought was Eli, his small hand searching my pillow, his inhaler zippered in his backpack. I swallowed panic and listened. Distant trucks, dripping water, men breathing nearby in darkness. The warehouse smelled of damp cement and old oil, a place where sound echoes too long. My hands were bound in front, not bleeding, just numb, and a plastic tie bit my skin when I shifted. Across from me sat Jenna, tied to a chair, face pale. Beside her, Sofia Vargas trembled, eyes wide, lips praying silently in helpless place. A man paced in polished shoes that didn't belong on this floor. Victor Rossi looked older than I expected. Silver at the temples, suit immaculate, voice calm enough to sound polite even when it carried cruelty. He studied us like numbers on a spreadsheet. From his posture, I understood the message. We were leverage, and Adrian was the target tonight. He wanted territory and contracts, the kind of invisible power that decides which trucks move and which neighborhoods eat. He implied that Adrian could trade pieces of his empire for my life, for Jenna's, for Sophia's. He implied that if Adrian refused, our endings would be made to look accidental. My stomach turned, but my mind stayed present. Breathing mattered. I anchored myself the way I'd practiced, feeling the chair edge, naming the flicker of light, the cold beam, the oily puddle, the far door. Fear rose, but I kept it contained. Have you ever felt your body beg to vanish and still forced it to stay? I watched the guards' feet, their angles, their impatience, and waited for openings. Eli's face hovered behind my eyes, trusting, the way he leans into my shoulder when sirens pass. I repeated a promise inside my skull. I will come home. I will tuck you in. Panic could steal breath, but it would not steal choices. Jenna's sobs drifted across the room. Sophia's breathing turned ragged, then steadier as she followed mine carefully. Headlights flashed through broken windows, and the guards straightened as if pulled by strings. The door rolled up with a grind, letting in night and men moving in practice silence. Adrian stepped in last, not rushed, not loud, but heavy in presence. The air tightened around him like static. Relief and dread collided in my ribs, and I stayed breathing. Rossi positioned himself so his men kept us between them and Adrian's team. He believed hostages equal control, that fear can be calculated like a budget. Adrian's people had numbers and angles, but every clean line of sight came with my body in it. I understood my role with brutal clarity. I was the stop sign in heavy traffic tonight. Then the lights died. 1 second the warehouse was fluorescent and exposed. The next it was darkness broken by emergency red strips along the floor. Shouts blurred into motion, boots scuffing, metal clanging somewhere distant. My heart tried to sprint, but I forced my breath into slow counts. Fear thrives in confusion. I decided I would not feed it tonight. In the red glow, a guard's grip loosened as he turned toward Adrian's team, and my chair shifted. I dropped low, keeping my head down, and pulled Jenna with me toward the shadow of a loading pallet. Sophia hesitated, frozen, so I met her eyes and made my breathing obvious, steady, until she copied it and moved. It was enough. Shapes crossed the space with fast discipline, and the guard's confidence fractured. Adrian's men moved to cover us without touching too hard, guiding rather than dragging. Rossi's calm cracked into impatience, and his plan lost its clean edges. I didn't see violence clearly. I heard it, felt it in the air, like thunder behind walls. Then my restraints were cut. Adrian reached me last, checking my face the way I check Eli's fever, quick and precise. His hand hovered at my shoulder, not demanding comfort, only confirming I was real. I shook hard enough for my teeth to click, yet my mind stayed clear. Jenna, breathing, Sophia upright, exits controlled. Relief hit like a tide, and tears burned without falling. Outside, night air slapped my lungs clean. I hadn't won by fighting. I'd won by refusing to disappear when fear tried to erase me. The old Maya would have collapsed and waited for rescue. This Maya breathed, moved, and helped others move too. Are we defined by the worst moment, or by what we choose inside it? I felt different. They hurried us into a vehicle, heaters blasting, windows tinted. I watched the warehouse shrink behind us, choices I would not forget. My phone buzzed with a photo of Eli asleep, sent by a neighbor, and my throat loosened. Safe for now wasn't safe forever. The war had moved into my heart, and home would need rebuilding on truth alone. By the time we left the warehouse, the night air felt too clean, like it didn't belong to what had happened inside. I sat in the back seat of a dark car with the heater blasting, hands wrapped around a paper cup I never drank from. My ears still rang with the buzz of failing lights, and my muscles kept twitching as if danger could reach through glass. But my mind stayed on one thing: Eli. I needed to put my face in his space and prove I still existed. When I finally stepped into my apartment, everything smelled like laundry and crayons. Eli was half asleep on the couch, hair sticking up, dinosaur socks mismatched. The second I lifted him, his weight settled against my chest like an answer. I breathed in the warm scent of shampoo and school glue and felt my heartbeat slow, one notch at a time. For the first time in days, I wasn't scanning corners. I was just holding my son, and that was enough to make the world feel real again. The next morning, I met Adrian with eyes that had seen too much and still refused to shut. I didn't choose him as a savior. I chose him as a partner, and partners need terms. I needed to know where Eli was at all times. I needed every change to my routine explained before it happened. I needed the truth, even when it was ugly, because safety without consent had already felt like a cage. Adrian didn't promise softness. He promised clarity, and for me, clarity was oxygen. Jenna was alive, and that mattered, even with the bruise she left on my trust. I didn't rush toward forgiveness like it was a bandage. She had to face what she'd done, and I had to protect my heart the same way I protected Eli. Over time, the chaos in her eyes settled into something like accountability. We spoke less. When we did, it was careful. She was no longer my default call at midnight. Maybe she never could be again, and I made peace with that. After Rossi's move failed, the pressure in the city shifted. Adrian tightened security, but he also pushed money into cleaner channels, the kind that keeps kids from getting recruited by desperation. I watched him fund after-school rooms, food drives, and library repairs in neighborhoods the city loved to forget. It wasn't redemption. It was strategy with a conscience, and it lowered the temperature on streets where predators thrive. I stayed a librarian at heart, even as my life changed shape. I helped build literacy nights where parents could bring kids for free books and hot cocoa. I organized school supply drives and a small reading corner at Eli's school for children who struggled the way he once did. When people thanked me, I thought of Linda, and how she believed stories could hold a person together until real help arrives. My panic didn't disappear. It learned new boundaries. Some nights, loud sirens still tightened my throat, and I still had to name objects in a room to keep my mind from sprinting. The difference was that I no longer hated myself for it. I started sharing what worked with other single parents, exhausted nurses, and anyone whose body runs alarms too easily. Fear is not weakness. It is a signal, and you can learn to carry it without letting it drive. One Saturday, I hosted a small reading circle in a refurbished branch on Lehigh Avenue. Kids piled onto beanbags, and I watched parents relax for the length of a chapter. Adrian's foundation paid for new shelves and the repairs, but I made sure the staff knew the library stayed theirs. Jenna volunteered once, quietly, sorting crayons with Sophia, and I kept my distance while noticing she showed up anyway. That, more than apologies, was the start of a slower kind of repair for me. Months later, I stood at a secured window in a warm home base, watching Philly's skyline turn gold at 7:30 in the morning. Eli sat at the table, sounding out a new book, proud and serious. Adrian moved through the kitchen quietly, more guard than guest, but present. I realized I hadn't lost myself in all this. I had expanded. Home wasn't the address. Home was truth, boundaries, and people who show up. If this story made you feel something, tell me what home means to you. And if you want more stories like this, please like, share, and comment.